Thank you everybody for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of our Perceptive podcast series here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I am Josh Beiser, as my videos now perfectly aligned, which for the record people, they won't know what we're talking about. But my guest is a long-time guest for the channel and one of my favorite developers to have on. He is the lead designer and owner of Wadget Eye Games, who's been making a variety of point-and-click adventure games over the years, including the Blackwell series, Unavowed, and they are currently wrapping up their latest game, Old Skies. So, for everyone watching, and for people watching this record, please welcome to the cast, Dave Gilbert. It's been a while. How are you doing?
Yeah. How long has it been? I know,
I think 2 years, maybe? A year, two?
Something like that, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. It's been a while, but it's good to be back.
No one keeps track of time around here. That's the general rule. But yeah, it is a pleasure to have you back on. I can see a chat is saying hello as well. It is great to have you on. It's great to have everyone coming out in the chat. And for those of you watching this recorded in the future. But yeah, it has been quite a while since we last spoke. And yeah. Again, like, a whole lot has been going on, I guess, for everyone, especially for the year 2024. So, I guess to get the ball rolling with, for anyone who may be new watching or tuning in late, how's everything with you? And, of course, like, give everyone, like, the little spiel about, what Wadget Eye Games is.
Sure, I'm well. I just moved to Pennsylvania. You might have noticed the new background or lack thereof. I'm in a new place. New state, whole new, everything. It's wild. I've been a New Yorker most of my life, and now I'm in Pennsylvanian. Is that the word? But yeah, I'm Dave Gilbert. I have been running a little indie company called Wadget Eye for about 18 years, since 2006. We do point-and-click adventure games. There's games I've written and developed myself. There's games that I've published on behalf of others. I've worked with many writers, developers, artists, composers, everything, voice actors. And yeah, that's pretty much how I spent the last 20 years of my life. And I love it.
Yep. And now you're closer to me, since I'm still here in New Jersey as well.
Oh, that's right. I don't know. Well, depending on where in New Jersey you are, Brooklyn could be closer versus where I am. I have no idea.
But yeah, it's great to have you back on, and there's definitely a lot we can chat about. I definitely want to ask you some more questions about kind of like the publishing side of the adventure game. But
sure.
Since you are here to talk about Old Sky, since that game is coming out, I know you have an announcement to an announcement coming out in a few days at the time of us recording this.
We're doing I confused some people because I said it's our launch trailer, meaning we are announcing the launch. But people thought that meant it was launching in 2 days. It's not launching in 2 days. Good God. But yeah, we're dropping a trailer with our launch, not a specific launch date, but a launch window. Like a period of the year. There's a date I have in mind, but I've been convinced by the PR consultant I work with, who's a lot smarter than I am, and she recommended to do a window instead of a date because several years ago we released Technobabylon the same week as The Witcher 3. Because we announced the date, Witcher 3 was announced, and too late now. So this way it gives us, if some big game is announced for that week between now and then, we can adjust. So we are going to announce a launch time frame on Thursday, but I'm excited.
Okay. And for any new people watching, what is kind of the elevator pitch for Old Skies?
Okay, it's a time travel time travel game, where you take clients into the past, and your job is to make sure nothing goes wrong. And nothing ever does. That's a lie. A lot of things go wrong. And inevitably things go off the rails, and you have to work to kind of set things right in various time travel-y ways. And there's 6 individual chapters and stories, time periods that you visit. And there's an arc that connects them all together, and it's it's sweet and lovely, and I had a lot of fun making it. I mean, it was hell in some cases, but it's been fun. It's been fun. I'm gonna miss it when it's over.
And correct me if I'm wrong. From our last chat, did this originally start as a game jam concept, or did this start somewhere
Did.
else?
Yeah, that's going back a ways in 2019. Almost at 2009. Jesus Christ. But I saved myself at the last second. Yeah, I did a jam game called Old Skies. I was kind of suffering. I kind of had that like second album problem after Unavowed. Even though it wasn't my second album, it was my first like big, success story, and I was having a lot of trouble thinking about what I wanted to do next. And there was a jam, an adventure game jam coming up, and I decided I was going to enter anonymously and kind of make something without like the pressure of people knowing it was me making something. So I made, and I had been learning 3D tools, so I had put together this little game using the tools that I had learned. Very very short, very quick thing and it was called Old Skies. Made it in 2 weeks. But I released it under a pseudonym. It was Solomon Gillerny, because King David, King Solomon, and Gilbert Gillerny. So I thought that was hysterical at the time. But anyway, I released that little thing, and it had a similar. It had like similar DNA. It had the same two main characters. You had a time traveler named Fia who talked to a handler in the future named Nazo, and they had to like solve a couple of little puzzles, and it was very quick, but I enjoyed making it. It kind of was a great way to kind of creatively make something without the pressure of, oh, this has to sell, or so on and so forth. Like it freed me up to do just something fun for the heck of it. I hadn't done that since my freeware days back in the early 2000s, where I just made stuff without thinking about having to earn my living from it. And I had so much fun making it. At first, I thought, well, let's turn this into a full game. And we tried doing the 3D thing, but it turns out that using, some pre-made assets from the Unity asset store is a far cry from making your own thing. And so we lost patience making it in 3D pretty quickly. So we pivoted back to 2D, and we've been working on that ever since.
Mm-hmm. And are you still using Adventure Game Studio for Old Skies?
I am, yeah.
Right. And I was giving like a talk with developers and students like last one, telling them about like kind of like free engines. I mentioned Adventure Game Studio. So how is that like still like being like how is that still for like making adventure games with?
I mean, it's great. It's old, but it's old in the way like Excel is old. We still use it. It still works. It's still great. It's just old. It's been around for a long time. Or even Unity. Unity is only about 5 years younger than AGS is. People still use that. There's something very powerful about a tool or an engine that knows exactly what you're trying to make, and that's AGS. It knows if you're trying to make a classic style 2D adventure game. It knows that is what you're trying to make. And it provides the tools for making that exact thing. And I find that very powerful. I tried pivoting to other tools, tried using Unity, using the Adventure Creator tool, and it just my brain just couldn't grok it. And eventually I just crawled back to AGS because I know AGS well. It has some issues, but any engine has its issues. So even if I would switch to something else, I'd just be dealing with other problems. But I personally really like it. It still works really well, and it's I think it's great. I still use it.
Fantastic.
As a developer, I think artists prefer other tools because AGS doesn't have a lot of like tools for visual effects, and I think artist types really miss that. They really would prefer that. But I'm not an artist, so I don't care.
And I guess with like developing Old Skies, is something that I remember we had this conversation back with Unavowed in terms of kind of like developing the story and the puzzle design. Because I even go back to our first chat when you were still in the middle of developing a Blackwell or finishing that one up. I guess with Old Skies, like how is
We've been talking that long?
Yeah, we have.
Like, that was 10 years ago. Oh my god, really? Wow. Okay.
Again, for the new folks watching, we don't think about time around here.
Oh my
it's
god.
still only like 2012, I guess. Like we're fine.
Blackwell Epiphany came out in April of 2012.
I just threw
So
that date
no,
out. I
I'm
wasn't
sorry,
even.
2014. It was 10 years ago, not 12. It was 2014. Okay.
But I guess the question I want to ask you is with Old Skies. I remember I played the demo. I only remember the last time I played the demo for Old Skies. It must be at least like 2, 3 years ago.
2022. Like we
Okay.
released that. Yeah.
Oof. What has
I
been kind
know.
of like the I guess like in terms of like developing like the puzzle style or puzzle philosophy, has that changed at all since like Unavowed?
Yeah. If only because I'm actually I'm actually putting puzzles in the game this time around. A lot of the criticism of my games tend to be that there are no puzzles, and often it's that I don't like designing them too much. But with Old Skies, what I one thing I did with it that I'm kind of happy with is that as I was designing a section of the game, I wanted there to be it's a scene where there's some peril where the player should and could be able to die, because the idea is that you're trying to stop this bank robbery, or you're trying to stop these people from dying during a bank robbery, and since there is like death, I was trying to figure out, okay, how do you figure this out? Like you read in the newspaper how they died, so you just stop it. Like that's not fun. Like there needs to be some element of peril, but it's kind of a sin to kill the player in an adventure game. So I came up with a kind of Prince of Persia style time rewinding mechanic, where if you die, you get that your handler in the future presses a button and your personal timeline gets rewound like about 5 or 10 minutes, and you can try again, and with all the memories that you had before. And when I came up with that idea, suddenly a whole like plethora of like design ideas kind of came to me, because the problem with a lot of adventure game moon logic is that it's just moon logic. You do something and you would never expect this to happen. Like, why would this happen? A lot of it makes no sense. But with this mechanic, a lot of it, I could totally indulge in a bit of moon logic. Like, there's, this person who's going to shoot you. You know exactly where they're walk into the room and shoot you. You know where they're going to be standing. So you could like put a billiard ball where they're going to stand, and then they step on it, fall, and you don't die. That kind of stuff. Like you would never, without the time winding mechanic, you would never know that the character is going to stand there, but now you do, and so I can indulge in a little bit of weirdness, and I had a lot of fun with that. And it also gives the player character a kind of lackadaisical attitude when it comes to dying, which has never been, not fun to write, especially with Sally. No, with Sally's kind of like sardonic, world-weary voice in my head as I'm writing it. It's like, oh, all right, I just died again, no big deal, whatever, just get this over with. We'll try again next time, that kind of stuff. So it's been fun. A lot of the puzzles are centered around that mechanic, and it's been fun.
Hmm. I know you post, I think, a GIF on social media, like different like death animations from old
Yeah.
times. There's always fun.
When it's like, I just sort of noticed, like, oh, like when you give yourself permission to kill off the player, I'm like, yeah, let's kill her off at every opportunity. And, it's like, I can't just have her get shot all the time. Maybe a guy throws a cleaver at you instead. Let's go with that. Okay. And it's just been fun. Sally has got to do a lot of death noises.
There we go. And yeah, I did interview Sally like a few years ago. Hopefully, we can have her back on at some point, and she
She's
can
great.
talk all about the different ways of dying like that. But I think, like from a thematic standpoint, I always love when like the gaming kind of like reference that in a cheeky or interesting way. I think still like the gold standard would be something like Hades, that everyone knows that we're in a roguelike, and everyone's just like, yeah, okay, you're back. Let's get this over with. Either I kill you, you kill me, but I'll see you back in the lobby.
I mean, that game is insane about it. Like, it will, like, there are hundreds. Like, they have, they deliberately kept every conversation like maybe 2 or 3 lines total. So, like, they can, to encourage you to just keep, dying and coming back and dying and coming back. So you can see the progression of these storylines, which it's very, very well done. Very brilliant. Yeah, but this isn't quite like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
Yeah.
if I just played a game called the Holy Gosh Darn, which is its entire game is this mechanic. Old Skies has like the rewinding in certain key moments, but Holy Gosh Darn is like the whole game. It's you can rewind like the whole thing. It's crazy. It's an amazing game. Y'all should play it. It's really fun. Also has the lead voice actress who played Petra in Emerald City Confidential. So I know the lead voice actress, which was cool.
Nice. Yeah, I did not hear that one. I'll have to add to my list to check out.
Fun and not very long either. So it's I really recommend it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess with kind of like coming up with like puzzle design and puzzles along those lines, I know again like we've talked about that kind of trick of how hard do I make the puzzles, how easy do I make them, especially when you have, and again like with something like with Old Skies, the fact that there is technically no game over. Like again, like for the new people watching, we talk about dying in an adventure game and bring up some like King's Quest, where you can die almost like every single screen. Or
Yeah.
what was it? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the infamous. Oh,
Oh,
you didn't pick up the
that's
one item at the beginning. 10 hours later, you lose.
that is I call that a game that hates you
Yeah.
because it hates you. It wants you to fail and suffer while you do it.
Yes.
It's a sadistic thing.
So I guess with like come up with like now that you kind of have like that freedom to say, okay, we can make the player die, but it doesn't really. It's not going to stop the game.
Mhm.
How do you?
Well, I never shied away from dying. At the Unavowed, you could die, but
Yeah.
it was just quick, like fade to white, and then it just
Yeah.
reloads. But this is actually part of the story. It's part of the world, and that was fun to ride around.
Mm-hmm. So with kind of the challenge of Old Skies, like what was it like coming up with like puzzles in this one in terms of I guess like difficulty, complexity, that kind of thing?
I guess the main issue is that um, time travel is complicated, and I learned a lot about why certain time travel stories are the way they are because I learned fast early on that I needed to establish some like ground rules, not just about how the rules of time travel works, but also the limits I need to set myself for the story. There's a reason why Back to the Future, for example, to use like the most famous time travel movie ever. There's a reason why it never leaves Hill Valley.
Mm-hmm.
They never leave Hill Valley, and the story rarely expands beyond Marty or Doc's immediate family. It's they limit themselves, and I think that was very deliberate because it's very easy to get overwhelmed about just of how just all the possibilities. And also, when you're writing a time travel story, there's this stupid tendency to like want to make everything connected. Like, oh, here's a you meet a character and like, oh, is this someone from the future? Is this someone I meet later who's coming back? That kind of thing. There's this tendency to like want to connect everything and be very, very clever, and that's the danger when you find yourself wanting to be clever. If being clever becomes the point, then you run into trouble. One thing I did early on as I was designing it, I had decided each mission, each chapter had a very simple. There was okay. Here's what you're going back in time to do. Here's the complication that arises, and let's expand from there. Start off keeping it very, very simple. If like I come up with something clever while I'm writing the story, then I'm going to go with it because it's just something that happened very naturally and very organically. I'm not going to write the story with the intention of it being clever because you can't force that kind of stuff. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see like what fun stuff I came up with just by keeping it very, very simple and just kind of letting it happen. It took a long time. This game took a long time, and it had a couple of false starts. When I realized this is how I needed to write, I finally sat down and did it. And God, I've completely lost track of what your question was. I'm so sorry. I just sort of started babbling, and then I'm sorry. What was your question?
It was kind of talking
It
about
was in the weeds. Thank you, Rodian.
kind of talking about kind of like the developing the puzzle philosophy in terms of how easy, how hard, that kind
Okay,
of thing.
yeah. Yeah, so basically that was it. I would start off keeping it very simple. And if a situation, if a complication or something kind of came along very organically during the writing process, then I would go with it. and see where it led me. So a lot of the time it was just trying to, as Rodian just said, find my way through the weeds.
Hmm.
And so that was my philosophy. Just also have fun with it. I started this game during the height of lockdown. And I was really, really struggling. It was practically a lost year because I just couldn't make it work. And then finally, I just decided to have fun with it. And if something would make me smile, that is kind of what, if like I came up with an idea and it made me smile or laugh, I'm like, okay, I'm going to pursue this and see where it goes because that's what I need right now. And so I kind of ended up doing a lot of fun things that I might not have otherwise.
Hmm. And to your point about kind of like writing the story with like a purpose rather than like writing it for like being clever or like big moments, I think that's always been like one of like the more interesting things about kind of like the shows or the stuff that I enjoy. That I'm not a fan when like shows try to like it feels like they're chasing like the ending to their story. Like it just feels like the story's being written in service of the ending rather than kind of the story like organically getting to the ending. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I might have an idea of how it's going to end, but usually it's like I've always found if I'm trying to force a certain ending,
Hmm.
um, then everything else will seem forced. And so at some point, I have to draw a line under what I got and think, okay, this is what I have. Where is the most natural way it can progress from here? And usually, I'm pleasantly surprised. Or sometimes it'll be in the same ballpark as that original ending, but there's like a different, different context behind it, or it puts a different spin on it, or whatever, or what have you. Like I know, like I remember with one of the missions in Unavowed. I don't know if you remember the cake. There was a ghost called KK, a little girl, and there was a dragon. And I thought the end of it, you and KK are going to ride the dragon. And I was trying to force that, but I couldn't make it work. I realized that there was just no way, there was no reason for it, and I could not force it. I just could not force it. So I did a jailbreak instead, and I think that was a lot more fun.
And with kind of the structure of Old Skies, you said it's like I think you said 6 chapters or 6 individual stories. Is
Mhm.
this will there be kind of like any like carryover or elements of like manipulation, kind of like what was in Unavowed?
There's a bit. I
Hmm.
mean, when I my philosophy starting this project was that excuse me, was that I did have an idea of an arc for this character Fia, because at first it was, you could tell this was written, this was conceived during lockdown because a lot of it is about isolation and about kind of the world outside the door that's happening without you, because as a time traveler history's constantly changing around her. And so she's like she'll be reading a book and suddenly it'll like change, like the chapter, the words will change because history has changed, that kind of thing. So it's very hard to have relationships or close friendships aside from the people she's working with, or even just to kind of live a normal life because everything keeps changing. And so that kind of gives you this nihilistic attitude. And taking her from my thought was, okay, I want to take her from that, and I want to kind of bring her, make a kind of evolve her into someone who gives a damn about something, and that is there. But my philosophy when I started this project was that the individual chapters, the individual missions, have to be like fun.
Hmm.
And I designed each of these missions like in isolation. Like here's an idea for a story, here's an idea for a story, here's an idea for a story. Let's focus on those, and because those have to be fun and interesting, and you have to enjoy playing them. Because without those, it doesn't matter if I have the best story arc in the world. The game is not going to be any good. So I focused on those. And I'm like, all right, there's this glue that connects them together, which is maybe not as strong as the individual stories. It's there. But my philosophy starting when I started this project was like, if as long as the individual missions are fun, then my job is done. There is this arc, which I think has actually turned out to be really like, I ended up getting really engaged by it as I worked on it. And so like there is like an arc there, but it's not like things really carry over from mission to mission. It's more how each mission is a bit of a reflection of that. Excuse me, of the current point in her arc. It's sort of every mission corner sort of relates to what she's going through at the time. So it's not quite like Unavowed, but it's still everything is kind of connected.
All right. And
Someone just called me a genius. Thank you, Doggius. I assume that's how you say your name. More like a nerd. I could be both things. I could be both things.
yep,
Sure.
why not both?
Yeah.
And I guess with coming up with the, I guess like trying to like tie the story together or coming up with like the themes of the story. I remember when we were talking about Unavowed and kind of, I guess like that compartmentalization between episode one or scenario one, scenario two, scenario three. What was it like? I guess again, like with Unavowed, you were limited to the fact that it took place all within New York at that given time. And again, like we go even further back with Blackwell, the entire game was, I remember, I think you said it was like a love letter to New York. Now,
Yeah.
now
Well,
with
I didn't think of that as a limitation in Unavowed because I knew it was all going to be in New York.
what was it like with like Old Skies now, or having this like freedom to just say, well, I can make this anywhere. Like, what was it like coming up, like, as we were saying, like that challenge of knowing when to limit yourself and knowing how far to go? How did that play into developing Old Skies?
Well, like I said, like how Back to the Future knew to limit itself, and I knew I had to do the same thing. So there were a few limitations I gave myself. They don't leave New York. So it's all New York, and it's like they're branches of this time travel agency. This is the New York branch. They only handle in New York. That's my limitation. So they never leave New York, any time period, but it's got to be within the city. And there were also some limitations I put. Like for the most part, I gave myself freedom to like do anything I wanted. I didn't want to get too lost in the weeds of like, oh, time paradoxes or whatever. So I kind of gave myself a bit of a role. Like basically, these characters are immune to paradoxes, so like they can change things and it's no big deal. It's allowed, but they're levels. And I realized like I needed like, okay, there's certain things that can't be changed. There's like every event and person in history has like a ranking of like how much they can change, and so it's like there are rules, but the rules are created by people, not by like the laws of physics or anything. So it's like you can theoretically do anything you want. It's just the rules are set by human beings that are fallible. And so those are the limitations and rules that I set for myself, just to prevent myself from getting completely lost. Because like I said, once you start doing a time travel story, you can wrap your head into knots. There's a wonderful book called The Time Traveler's Wife, where they set rules about time travel, and it's like the whole thing is like a logic puzzle trying to follow it. Like it just follows these rules so exactly, and they never deviate. I'm sure it was very tempting, but it's difficult. The Dave Gilbert game set in New York. Nobody saw this twist. I know, right? I know.
Well, now that you moved to Pennsylvania, will your next adventure game be set in Pennsylvania?
No, I've lived in New York practically all of my life. I know it a lot better than the Philly suburbs. So by the time I wrote my first game set in New York, I knew New York pretty well. I don't know this area very well yet at all. So yeah, I've only been here about 2.5 months. So we'll see, maybe, I don't know. My heart is always in New York. We moved here for certain reasons. But like my heart will always be. I will always be a New Yorker, always.
All right. And yes, to Pamela's comment, Dave always finds the best actor voices.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the guy who plays Hades in Hades also played my favorite character on Avowed. Yeah, and Logan Cunningham. He was Logan. Total coincidence. And on Avowed, he was also Bennett in Resonance and Horatio Nelbilt in Primordia. I've worked with him a few times. He's great. Logan's amazing. He's just absolutely amazing.
And I guess it's actually a good like tangent to talk about, at least for this, like in terms of like finding like voices for your characters. I think we had this conversation before, but what was it like coming up or trying to figure out like who would be like the right voice for the various characters in Old Skies?
Well, you since we have talked about this before, you know that this can very easily turn into the voice acting discussion if you let me. So feel free to pull me back, because I will talk about this for a while. I have worked with a lot of voice actors in like the 18 plus years I've been doing this, and they've just got doxxed. I don't know. I hope not.
Is there something about the beeping, or?
I said I live in the Philly suburbs, but that's like, you could try to find me if you want to. That's a pretty big area. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah. I've worked with a lot of voice actors over like the 18 plus years I've been doing this. And so I decided after the Nighthawks audition, which I did about a year and a half ago, where it was an open call, and I got 4,000 individual submissions, and it was just like by the time I got to the end of it, my brain was fried, and B, I realized I was mostly casting like my like, folks I worked with before anyway, because I knew I could trust them, and I knew they could like nail certain things, and so for Old Skies, I decided just to work with. I didn't do an open call. I just have a list of all of the actors I've worked with before, and I just wrote them. I said, "Hey, I love you all. I'm working on this game. Could you all submit an audition for this project?" And so I worked with people I auditioned people I've mostly worked with before, with a few exceptions because there were some. I like to match. Voice prints where I can. Like if I have an older Asian woman or have a black man or an Indian lady or whatever, like I want the actor to reflect that. That is something I feel very strongly about now. I used to not do that, and I feel if I could go back in time and change anything, it would be that. I've always regretted that Techno Babylon has our most diverse group of characters, and I cast all white people. I regret that to this day. They all did an amazing job. They all did fantastic. But if I could do it again, I wouldn't have cast them. But anyway, so I kind of went with people I knew already. And I knew that Sally and Edwin were going to play Fia and Nazo because they were Fia and Nazo in the Jam game. And I already had known them. I've known Sally for years. I've known Edwin for years, and I loved them both. And I always had their voices in my heads when writing the characters. And when I decided to expand it to a full game, I asked them right away. I'm like, it could be several years from now, but would you want to do the role? And they said yes. So I always wrote with them in mind. And I'm just so glad that they were able to do it because they were both great. There's something very powerful about writing for a specific person where you can hear their voice in your head. That you don't often get to do that. For Blackwell, I got to do it because reoccurring characters, I knew the actors already. So that was really cool. And some other actors like, Abe Goldfarb, who I don't need to introduce at this point. I knew what role I wanted to give him. I always if there's a character that really needs care and that needs to be elevated, I always give it to him because he will give it a certain something that you can't quite define, and I know I could always rely on Abe to do that. And other actors, I just love all the actors I've worked with. Like there's some of them have become dear friends of mine, and I just love working with them, and I wish I had more projects so I could work with them more. Pamela Lawrence could listen to Sally all day. I do listen to Sally all day. I haven't gotten tired of her yet.
And to the latest comment, was it Kegloon? Yeah, I just heard her in Harold Halibut as one of the main characters.
So good. Wii U, she's so great. Yeah, I know she had recorded that years ago, and she had been chomping at the bit to talk about it for the longest time. So, and it's great. But and Edwin was in that too. So I played that game over a weekend. I spent all weekend listening to Sally and Edwin for fun, and then Monday morning I got to listen to them for work. So I hear them a lot.
And to your point about hearing the voice in your head. I think that's something that we definitely see a lot from, especially the animated side. We've heard over the years so many amazing voice actors and voice actresses in animated series. They just become synonymous with that voice or with that particular character.
Yeah, often. You just can't imagine it without them.
And I guess with more about Old Skies itself, in terms of writing the end to this, because again, as we were saying this, you're getting ready to make the announcement of the announcement, be it late, you're almost at the light at the end of the tunnel, you're almost there. What's it like? Excuse me, because I just had a conversation with a developer who's working on the visual novel side of things, and we had a discussion about kind of pacing and structure in that respect. But with something like with Old Skies or the adventure games in general, what is it like to, I guess, like wrap up the story in some fashion?
Ooh, that's a good question. I know that like, I mean, it depends on the game. I know that because right now, like I finished writing. I wrote the last scene, or at least I wrote the dialogue for the last scene of Old Skies like almost a year ago. And for this one, I did since because it is time travel and there's a lot more puzzles involved. It requires a lot tighter plotting than I'm used to. I'm typically a very seat of my pants designer. I kind of make it up as I go half the time. But this required a lot more pre-planning, and so I like actually wrote the dialogue for the ending, almost a year ago. And so in my head, I've been done with it for a long time. I've just been, actually going through the production, doing the production stuff of getting the assets made, importing everything, fixing all the bugs, of which there's still a lot, but we're getting there. And it's, uh, yeah, I mean, it depends on the game, though. I know that, like, for a game like Blackwell, I remember like writing the last scene of that game. I was in a cafe. I remember the cafe. It was called Crispella, which is gone now. But I was sitting in Crispella writing that last scene and like almost bursting into tears because it was like I wasn't ready to say goodbye to it, because that series had been in part of my life for almost a decade at that point. And I liked these characters and I knew I was going to miss them, but I knew it was time to say goodbye. And even Abe felt the same way when he recorded the last scene. He wasn't quite ready to say goodbye to it, and even now, like I miss them. I'm not going back. I'm not writing more because I do feel very strongly it's over, and going back would cheapen it. But like saying goodbye to that was hard. Unavowed less so because I would very deliberately designed it. Like whereas Blackwell, like finishing Blackwell was like saying goodbye to friends I had been around with for a long time. Unavowed was a little different because that was like I'd only kind of the game took a while to make, but I felt like these were friends I had just met.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'll see them again sometime soon. Like I'm probably going to go back to Unavowed someday. And so I didn't feel quite as bad. Old Sky's sort of the same thing. It's definitely a standalone story. There's not much that can be done with the player character after the game is done. But I feel like it said something that I really wanted to say. And there's something very lovely about when you're not sure like what your art, you create something, you're not sure what it's about. And then suddenly you realize, oh, this is what it's been about the whole time. And a core message or theme in Old Skies is about, legacy and like what it means to like leave your mark on the world. And what would you change it if you could? That kind of thing. And is it important to have a legacy? That kind of thing. And I'm pushing 50, and especially since I was like, I came up with this during the height of lockdown. That's something I'm thinking about a lot. As you get older, you think about that stuff. Like what have I done? Like what will the world remember me? That kind of stuff. And I was able to kind of explore that a bit with time travel, and that was kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that going into it, but coming out of it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is what it's been about. Okay. And I realized all those themes kind of nicely tied together, and I was very happy with it.
Yeah, and to that point about kind of like, I guess like writing something like Blackwell versus writing like Unavowed, I think that's a very like interesting challenge for a lot of people, especially with like when you have like a franchise or like a story. There's always that like that voice in the back head saying, no, just keep going, we'll have 10 more stories or 20 more stories with these characters. And there's definitely something more about that in terms of like knowing when like a story has kind of like played itself, that you've kind of like said everything that you needed to say.
Well, with Blackwell especially, I know when I started, I actually found when we moved to Pennsylvania, I found in a box in our basement, in the building of the basement of the building, full of old design notebooks, including like the first design notebook where I originally was like hashing out the Blackwell series, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can write these games forever. I've got like 10 ideas. I could do 10 games at minimum. And I'm just looking at some of the ideas. I'm like, I guess that was an okay idea, but in practice, as I was working on them, I would again look through the design notebooks and see where I was struggling. I was sort of struggling to like keep this fresh and exciting and interesting. Like their gimmick and mechanic is cool, but like I think by the fifth game it had kind of played out to a degree, and I don't know how much I didn't know how much longer I could keep it exciting and new, especially in my head before I got sick of it. And I knew that like the first Blackwell game is the ropiest, it's the jankiest. It was my first commercial game, and every Blackwell game I would create would still be tied to that first very janky game. And so I wanted to put a line under it, put it, say, okay, this is done now, and then move on to other things, which I did with Unavowed. And I think just for me, that was the best thing I could have done, because I was able to like free myself of all that baggage. Although I indulge in like keeping it within the same universe, so I can indulge in like a cameo or a reference here and there. There's a few references in Old Skies that I'm very very happy with, but I can indulge. But that's just a little. Those are just little indulgences. I'm not indulging in like. If I had been sticking with Blackwell all this time, I think everyone would be sick of it by now. The Gilbert verse, thank you.
Yeah. And
almost like Wegaverse always rolled off my tongue better. But
there we go. And Rodion, who hopefully I didn't butcher that too badly, did ask you a question earlier. Do you have a chart to track like timelines and plot in terms of Old Skies?
Well, one way I limited myself, because my original draft of Old Skies, before I decided to split it up into episodic stories, it was going to be Day of the Tentacle style, where you would visit like I think 5 or 6 different eras. You could go to any era at any time, and you would change things in an earlier era that would update things in a later era, but that would be the whole game, like a whole game's worth of stuff. It was like this big knot you had to untangle, and I just couldn't hold all that in my head. And I did the whole like charting and timelines and dependency charts. It was too much. And one way I limited myself, which was necessary with each chapter, I decided, okay, you go back in time to like this time period. You go back in time to the 1870s. You stay there until the mission is done. You don't jump back and forth to other eras, unless the story requires it. You can't just go anywhere at any time. If suddenly, like I realized as I was writing one of the stories, where it was kind of a murder mystery, and it was all about talking to people and asking about what happened, and something about that didn't gel with me. It felt very boring until I realized you're a time traveler. You're learning about stuff that happened 6 months ago. You could just go back in time 6 months ago and experience it for yourself. And so, like I said, when I come up with an idea while writing a section, then I'm going to go with it. So then I decided, okay, so whatever. You can go back in time 6 months and like experience it for yourself. And that's how you get that information, rather than just asking people about it. I felt that was a lot more interesting. So I don't need to chart and track things so much, because I deliberately tried to keep it a lot more simple. There's one like reoccurring family that crops up, and I did have to do some math to determine like, would this be someone's grandfather or great grandfather, that kind of thing. But for the most part, it's not that important. Like if I got the years off a little bit, then like I think people can forgive me. But one get out of continuity free card that I have is, timelines keep changing. Things just keep changing. So if I get something wrong, alternate timeline. Done.
Or for everyone watching, the Wizard did it for the Simpsons.
The Wizard did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. A time traveler did it. And it's just, they weren't there. Anyway, yeah.
And I guess like continue on that point. Like one thing I remember complimenting you on this on the previous when we talked about Val, is like kind of like that like lived inness that kind of like permeates throughout Blackwell to Unavowed, and I'm sure will be in Old Skies, about I guess like how things like make sense within the world. Like you said, like it's same place in the New York branch. It's like how in Unavowed you only dealt with cases in New York, but there was, I think you spoke to someone from like a different branch, if unavailable.
Briefly,
Yeah.
yeah, there was one scene where you walk in and the leader of the Unavowed is talking to someone from another branch, and an early draft that was going to come into play a little bit more,
Hmm.
and then I ended up not doing it, but I decided to keep that scene anyway because I thought it was a neat little world building
Hmm.
detail, even if it doesn't play into the story that you're experiencing. It's still cool to know that there's stuff that exists beyond the world that you're in, around
Hmm.
like the room that you're in. So I kept it, even though like you don't. It's not even integral to the story at all.
Hmm. And I guess like the question I want to ask you about. So I'm sure we have like writers and people interested in like storytelling in the chat or watching this recorded. Any like tips or like any like thoughts about like trying to give like a story like that, lived in sense or that kind of like world building? Because again,
Ooh.
that's another thing that can feel like forced in a lot of stories if you don't handle it right.
Uh, Again, it's a vibes thing. I
Hmm.
know that with Old Skies, I deliberately, and that some of the testers actually called me on it, even though I did this very deliberately. Because, like I said, the way Fia exists is that she's very separate from the world, and so she's very, very disaffected, and so her home life reflects that. Like she doesn't have a lot of possessions, she doesn't have a lot of like posters or books because again they all could change, and so like her home life tells you nothing about her life or her world, very deliberately so. And that was very off-putting for a lot of the testers when they and that's my one little worry. I'm breaking a lot of my own rules about how to like establish things. But I guess that's it. Like you gotta learn the rules before you can break them. And so I'm deliberately doing that because when people note like, oh yeah, she's just so disaffected. She just doesn't care about anything. I'm like, yeah, wouldn't you? Like it's the same thing. Like the very first scene of the game, which is not really a spoiler, like and this actually was like this idea for the scene came into my head, and that's where this whole thing kind of extrapolated from, is that she's picking up a guy at a bar and it's going very very well, and then he just suddenly stops existing. He just disappears, and she's like, "Oh, you know, it must be Tuesday," and that's just her life. And again, it's like my whole philosophy in creating this character is like, what does this do to you? And the few other characters that she works with, it's like how it affects them in different ways. And so you don't get that lived in feeling, with these characters that you would in something like Unavowed. Like with Unavowed, I deliberately wanted like their HQ to feel like it had been around for several hundred years, that like a century ago someone put some object on a shelf and it's just been there ever since, that kind of stuff, just weird knickknacks from around the world, just they're collecting dust, some like weird artifact or something that's just like on the wall that no one's noticed for a long time, just and Ben really blew that out of the water. Like it looks like it feels very cozy, and that's very deliberate again. And so a lot of people like were really resonated with that. My one worry about Old Skies is that people won't. But again, like the individual missions are where I put most of my effort. So, I think like those are fun. So I think those will pull the game through.
Hmm.
And I think by the time you get through the first mission or two, you'll see where I'm going with Fia.
Hmm.
It's a bit. It's different. It's a bit different than what I usually do. But it's something that really spoke to me, especially at the time I was writing it. Like I said, pandemic. That's when I did the bulk of the design, and I think the game really does reflect that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think kind of like having like that sense of vibes is like very important, like for these kinds of stories. So I think it goes with a lot of the stories that I like to like read or experience, where like if something gets introduced, that like it feels natural to the plot and it gets explored. Like I think like the one thing that always like annoys me is when stories have like we introduce something and then it never comes up. Like it was just there to serve a 5 second like clip or plot, and then
Mm.
never again.
I mean, it can serve like if it's like a world building detail or something like that conversation with the other branches of the Unavowed. Like I think that can serve a purpose. But I always use this example of Dragon Age Inquisition, and I
Mhm.
love me Dragon Age. I love Dragon Age, but there's this one moment at the beginning where you meet a character named Iron Bull, who everyone loves. Iron Bull is great, but he'll spend like 20 minutes telling you like the history of his people, and you never meet a single other member of his race for a good 20 hours, and then it becomes relevant. All that stuff he told you at the beginning suddenly becomes relevant 20 hours in. It's like, okay, was I supposed to remember all that? And it was kind of time wasted. I mean, yes, it was like a world building detail, but it's like it doesn't reinforce anything that I'm experiencing. Like talking to the other branches, like it reinforces the world. Like, okay, there's other branches that have their own problems, beyond what your branch is experiencing. I think that's relevant. But learning about like the culture of a race you never see that has no impact on the story that you're experiencing, that's different. And I think only video games get away with this. Like no other medium gets away with this. Like games can get away with just like wasting so much of your time.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Orion had another question. If you were to set a game outside of New York City, what place and time period would you love to explore?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know about time period, but I always feel strongly about wanting to connect to a place that I'm creating. And so that's one reason why I choose New York a lot is because I feel very connected to that city. I lived in Boston for about 5 years. I would love to set a game in Boston just because I feel very connected to that city. Admittedly, it's Boston of like the mid to late 90s because that's when I was at university there. Dating myself a bit, but yeah, I'd love to try another city that I'm familiar with, or London. I spend a lot of time in London. I love there. I can't really think of. I don't know. It's wherever this is very esoteric and new agey, but it's just wherever the muse takes me. I can't quite control that. It's whatever I feel moved to do. If I ever do like a fantasy or a sci-fi epic, I'll set it in space. I don't know, but I have yet to feel moved to do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There should be Matt Damon and Ben Affleck references in that Boston game. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I love how everyone associates them with Boston. I've never seen that movie.
And about like interesting locales, I still remember enjoying the excavation of Hobbs Barrow from last year. That was really nice.
That was interesting because I felt very connected to that because my wife is from England and her parents are from like a small town like that. And so I'm very familiar with those little villages and they did such a good job recreating that. Like they spent a lot of love and care creating that space, that place, and that time period. That's why when I played their demo and I really like I was really happy they agreed to let me publish it because I really wanted to be involved. It's still just amazing. I'm so happy for all their success. It's just an amazing achievement.
Mm-hmm. And for the chat watching, I just want to give a quick time check. We are just about 55 minutes in.
Wow.
Yeah, time certainly flies. Again, no pun intended there. I do have a few more questions about Old Skies, and I do want to get to talk more about kind of like adventure game publishing, kind of like where the scene's at from you. So, for the chat watching, if you do have any questions for Dave about Old Skies, developing it, anything like that, be sure to get them in, because we'll be switching topics, I would say maybe in like the next 10-ish or so minutes. So, with kind of wrapping up on Old Skies, or like coming to the end of it now, I guess with the kind of like development of it, like one question I always like to ask, and I think I'm pretty sure I asked this of you before, what has been kind of like any like interesting challenges or anything that like came up that you kind of had to come with like a unique or interesting solution for? Again, keeping with the adventure game theme.
Ooh, I mean, at first, like I said, this game had a couple of false starts, and that's underselling it. Like I had so much trouble starting this game. I think because I started just before. Sorry.
I think you froze for a second. You kind of like lagged. Yeah. Yeah.
All right,
there you go. Now you're back.
All right. I don't know where did I leave off?
I think just like the false starts.
Oh yeah. Well, also it's probably because I started making it just before lockdown. So I started making it like around January of 2020, and then lockdown happened, and trying to homeschool a kid and being at home all day, being distracted by everything being on fire, and trying to like get myself into a creative space where I could create something. It just wasn't happening, and I was just pushing it, like banging my head against this wall. Because sometimes I think, oh, only way out is through. I had to keep going. This is my family's livelihood. I couldn't just not do it, right? And so it was just this negative feedback loop, everything. And it was a terrible year. And like by the time a year had gone by, and I just barely created anything, and I just hated it. And I just put it in front of friends, and I'm like, tell me what you think. Is it just me? And they didn't really like it either. And I was ready to burn the whole thing to the ground, until I just sort of, I took a week off. I just put it to bed, didn't do anything else. I just focused, because every day was like a negotiation with my wife and I of who got to work that day and who had to handle the homeschooling. So it's like, all right, you work. I'm going to do all the homeschooling. I'm not even going to think about it. And I rebooted it to what it is now. And I think just I had to kind of find the fun in the idea. And that was the most important thing, because I wasn't enjoying it. I didn't like anything I was creating, and that was the main thing I had to relearn. I kind of, I went back and looked back through all my old design notebooks to see, like, how did I do this before? I was able to do this so many times before. What was I not doing now? And I kind of had to like rediscover, like the joy of creating and why I created in the first place. It's so esoteric, but it's like when your livelihood relies on it. Like, you have to be like free and open, but at the same time, it's like you gotta get it done or you're going bankrupt. Those things are sometimes hard to mesh. And so I needed to take a little bit of time and figure it out, which I did. Thank God. So that, I don't know if that answers your question, but that was like the biggest issue I had towards the beginning. But like, yeah, that was. But then ever since I retooled it and rebooted it, I've kind of just been going ever since. Like, I haven't. It hasn't been that painful. Like, there have been moments where it's like, I'm not sure where the story is going. But it was more, I'm not sure about this specific moment of the game rather than the whole thing. Like, I don't know if this bit works rather than I don't know if the whole game works. Those are two very different things.
Yeah.
And I was very glad I was able to break through that wall and get the game done, even though that meant that this has probably been the longest I've ever personally worked on anything. I don't know whether to say that I started it in 2020 or 2021. Whether it's 2021 is when I started Old Skies, 2021 is when I rebooted the project and started over with a much better design. So I like to say 2021 to make myself feel better. So it's been 3.5 years, not 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that point about like trying not to force it, I think that's a very important tip for a lot of people. I mean, even for myself, a lot of stuff I do here, like some days, like I think people can tell when your heart's not in a project.
Oh.
And like with the videos that I do, like I've like even like lately, I know some days I'm just like, you know what, maybe this one I'm not going to do a design talk because I just don't have like it's. I think it's better to do something when you feel rather than trying to force it, because then it can come off like, I think, more soul draining in that respect.
Sincerity can't be faked.
Yeah.
No, it can't. Especially with something like this. The thing about making games, especially as an indie, and this is sort of funny, and like, because no matter how much you come up with an idea and you think this is what I'm going to make, and you have to love it. You have to absolutely be in love with it, because that love is finite. The more you work on it, the more you're good. That level goes down, and like you start to hate it, and you need to have a surplus of love and affection for what you're creating. And the problem I've been facing is that, like, I know every project you hit that wall where you hate it, you hate yourself, you hate the project, you think it's terrible, and most of the time it's bearable because the projects don't last that long. But the fact that, because this game has lasted, this production has lasted so effing long, I've been stuck in that I hate this and everything phase for so much longer, which is why you asked, like, how does it feel to end a project? This moment, getting to the end, is a relief. 6 months after launch, I'm going to be looking back with rose-tinted glasses and feel nostalgic and think, God, that project was so easy and so much fun, and God, I miss it. It wasn't that bad, was it? And
Let's do it again.
yeah, because I remember looking through those old design notebooks and seeing for one of the Blackwell games, which I think now just flowed. They came so easily. The longest I worked on any of them was a year and a half. But I found like a page and a half where I just would it was just screed of self-hatred. Like, I hate this. Can't do this. It just going on and on and on. And I'm reading this. I'm like, I don't remember this, but I must have felt this way. But with Blackwell, it's like each one did maybe a year and a half tops. So I wasn't in that stage for very long. Old Skies, like when the doldrums hit, they last for a while because this game is just big. So for the next project, I always say this. We'll see if I actually do it. I'm going to try to make something smaller next time. So y'all heard it here. We'll see if I do that.
All right, chat. You can come back to this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking about in that hated phase of a project, I'm in the middle of writing my Metroidvania book, so I should be getting there in about 2 weeks since I have a deadline coming up. So I'll be joining in that front. Let's see. So a few questions came in. So Rodion asked, "What inspired the name Old Skies?"
Ooh, I'll start from the Jam game because in that one, I had this the backstory I had for the characters is that they came from this dystopian future, and so she comes back in time to the present day, and she looks up and she's like, "Oh my God, I can see the moon! These old skies are amazing." And I just something about that phrase just felt very evocative, and I just kept it because you go back in time, you're looking at older skies, and I it doesn't maybe make a lot of sense, but I couldn't come up with anything better. And I just think it's a very evocative name, and I just kept it because I liked it. Same thing with Unavowed. Why are they called the Unavowed? My way of thinking was when you join, you lose you disavow any affiliations that you had before, so you're unavowed. And even though that's not in the game at all, I still like the word, so they became the Unavowed. That's all. I don't know. Names just come from places. Like Shardlight. They are shards that give off a light, but they're not central to the story. I think they created them because of the name. I don't even know what that name, who knows what it means. It's just an evocative name. I had to call it something, and I ended up liking, I couldn't come up with anything better. And so in my head, it's Old Skies, and forever it's Old Skies.
Let's see. And
Almadon, hey, speaking of it, there's Edwin right there. Edwin, the Nazo himself, is in the chat. Hey, Edwin. I just finished importing his last lines last week. So he's all in the game now until I discover the lines that I forgot to record, and I'll have to ask him to do pickups later, but we'll see. And Thomas Reagan, the composer. Hello. Oh my God, the gang's all here. Nice. Is Sally here? Get Sally in here. Jeez.
Yeah. And to Radion's comment, I actually did interview Ron Gilbert one time. I think when they were doing was it Thimbleweed Park? I'm confusing all my adventure games. So
no, Thimbleweed Park was me. Blackwell was Ron.
Okay, yeah. There you go.
There we go.
One day I'll have to have both Gilberts on. I need both Dave Austry and Dave Zemeckis from New Blood. Just confused.
Ron and I have met. We've met before. It's and we talk, and it's he's a lovely man. He's a lovely guy.
Let's see, another question from Rodion that came in. What were the time travel stories or non-time travel stories that inspired?
There's a few. When I rebooted it, I decided to take a page from Legends of Tomorrow, which is a fantastic show. If you can get past the clunky first season,
yeah.
They course correct on everything that was bad, and they double down on everything that's great. Because they walk that line, the line between pathos and seriousness and utter bonkers. They walk it like a knife's edge, and it's I use the phrase "follow the serotonin." Like they. I'm gonna sneeze. God damn it! Come on, I hate this. It's like it's coming,
Yeah.
coming. Come on. Whatever. I'll just keep talking. Come on. Just stare at the light.
Never works for me with the Saturday
Oh
Night
my
Live.
god! I know it's coming. It's gonna come any second. This is the worst feeling. Ah! Anyway. All right. Whatever. Um, yeah, that's basically it. Keglenek. Yeah, so like the way they kind of indulge in a bit of fun while also taking themselves very seriously. Um, I did that with Old Skies. Like it gets ridiculous in places, especially with the constant dying. It can get really funny, but at the same time, like it can also then, but they do knuckle down and take it seriously. And I think and that show really is a gold standard for how to do that. It's just so great. Uh, so yeah, I was inspired by that one quite a bit. Um, anything else? I mean, I've always been inspired by writers like Stephen King and Pratchett and Jim Butcher, Dresden Files, just because of how economical they are with their writing. I mean, Stephen King, as long as his books are, they're very breezy because they're very economical. And I always try to do the same thing, do a lot with a little, especially since someone else is doing the art. So, and I always hate giving him more work. So I always think of like, how much can I do with this one background? Can we put a lot in here so it's like more, so I can do a lot with this one asset as opposed to having him create a lot of them, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember Legends of Tomorrow too. I stopped watching in like season 3 or 4, but yeah, like that first season was.
It's rough. It's
Yeah.
rough. Very CW, very very clunky. But then the second season, it's just like they just double down on what made the show good, and it's just like that cast just constantly snaps,
Yeah.
and they genuinely like each other, and also like have friction, and like and they just have fun with it, and
Yeah.
like they have the rules aren't terribly consistent, and that's okay because you're having fun. And same with Old Skies. Like the rules, maybe I try to keep them consistent. I have some, like I said, I have some limitations to some rules, but for the most part, it's like it follows the laws of don't think about it too hard. At least I'm trying to. So yeah, gold standard. I want to like rewatch that show now. It's so good. I was so sad when it was canceled, like in the middle of before it was officially finished. So sad.
Yeah, and I think like finding like that feel is such an important point about this. When you kind of like figure out what you want your project to be, is always like one of the trickier aspects, and something again that comes with a lot of developers that I have spoken with over the years.
Oh yeah, the what do you want this to be? Also, it's like, why are you making it?
Yeah.
I mean, the main I make a game because that's what I do, but also what is driven? Why was I driven to make games, or specifically these kind of games? And remembering that is extremely important. Like, why did I get into this? Why? Like, what exactly was I hoping to? Oh, you like
No,
you
I'm
went like this. I'm sorry, because you went like this, and I'm like, I thought like you were surprised. Like, what did I say? It's like, oh, no, yeah. It's like I have to constantly remember like why I do this. And when it clicks and everything's working, and I come up with something particularly fun, and I see it all come together, and it's no feeling like it. It's like one part. It's like 9 parts hating yourself versus like to 1 part feeling like an absolute god, and you live for that moment. You live for that.
I've not played the Shivia. It's in my backlog from Kevin. Yeah, I remember that
It's
one.
short. It's a very short one. It'll take a half hour tops.
Let's see. Anything else regarding like the development, the story? Anything else regarding Old Skies where we kind of talk more about kind of the adventure game scene today?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, everything is so up in the air now because a lot of the tools I relied on for promotion are kind of dying, and like Twitter is like everyone. It's like rats leaving a sinking ship. It's like the engagement I would get off of Twitter is just like getting lower and lower. You never know. It's like it feels like you're shouting into the void. And so I'm trying to like taking politics and the guy in charge out of it completely. I mean, it's a lot to take out, but I realized that relying on one platform to do like all of my marketing and all of my promotion is probably bad. So I'm trying to build up my presence on other platforms like Blue Sky and Mastodon, and I'm starting to like. I keep meaning to start up my newsletter again. I have one, and I have a bunch of subscribers to it. I haven't written anything to it in years, but I need to like start doing all the things that I just outsourced to Twitter, because Twitter was easy. I would write a quick thing,
Yeah.
I would get a reaction, and that was it. You know, and I had a feeling that one day this isn't gonna work as well, and that day is here. I didn't think it would be willingly dismantled from within, but here's where we are. And I've been thinking for years, I gotta like not get off Twitter because I rely on it too much, but start diversifying. And I've been meaning, and I'm finally starting to do that. I think you wrote me on Blue Sky. I think you reached out to me on Blue Sky. Yeah. So I'm working on that because I think you got to adapt, and I think it's a long time that I did. Yeah. So the like everything changes constantly. Before like maybe like 10 years ago, like everything changed every couple of years. Things were completely different. But yet, like for maybe the last 5 to 10 years, things haven't. You've kind of always approached selling a game in the same way, and it always worked. And now things are starting to change again. So I got to be aware of that stuff. And anyone who sells games has to be aware of that stuff.
Yeah. I think.
Yeah. By the way, I'm on Blue Sky and Mastodon, so follow me there.
Yeah, and I'm on Blue Sky as well. Same thing as my Twitter handle up there. But yeah, it's been very challenging because I think we're both very similar in terms of our social media. Like I just went Twitter, call it a day, and that was it. And
that was my marketing plan: tweet all day, and you gotta do more. Which it's more work, man. More work sucks. But
there's the most important note for today.
Yeah. It used to be, you got on Steam, that's everything done. You get on Steam, everyone sees your game. You don't need to do anything else. But now everyone's on Steam. Now you got to do work again. And so it's everything constantly changes.
And like just as I was getting like a somewhat decent following on Twitter, that's when the whole floor fell out on. I remember saying like 2-3 months before it all went to hell, I was like, just as now that everyone's following me, I'm talking, this is when it's all going to go wrong, and my prediction came true there.
It's fleeting.
Yeah.
It's like large follower accounts I don't know how much that means. It's nice to see that number go up, but there are people who have significantly lower follower count than me who do much better than I do, and vice versa. People have much higher follower counts than me that don't do as well as I do. So who knows? It's nice to see that big number, but who knows? It's so hard to quantify.
Yeah. And again, for anyone watching, if you want listen to me ramble about game design and indie games, be sure to follow me on Blue Sky there.
Ooh, I like making a Old Skies reference on Blue Sky. I need to work that out somehow. Yeah. I don't know what that would be.
I decided to cut this interview in half, as the second part of it is Dave and I discussing more about the adventure game genre and publishing as a whole. And with this going up during the holiday break and week, I didn't want to overload everyone with a 2-hour discussion. So, this part is going to wrap up here. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any more questions or thoughts for Dave, let us know in the comments. Check out Old Skies, and come back next week for our part 2, where we'll be discussing more about the challenges of doing publishing and making an adventure game for, both 2024 and now 2025. With that said, have a great holiday, and see everyone next time.